The clerk slid the certificate back across the counter, and Elena Rourke's hand froze before she touched it. "This isn't right," the clerk said, tapping the seal at the bottom corner. "This registration number doesn't exist in our system. Whoever filed this filed it wrong, or it was never filed at all." Elena stared at the paper she had kept in a lockbox for 2 years. Her marriage certificate. The one she had framed a copy of and hung in a closet because Damon didn't like it displayed in the living room. The one that had made her, in her own mind, a wife. "Check again," she said. The clerk checked again. Then a third time, tapping keys, frowning at the screen. "Ma'am, I'm sorry. There's no record of a marriage between you and a Damon Vance filed in this county, or in the state database. This document has a real seal design, but the number is fabricated. This certificate is forged." Elena didn't cry. She didn't argue. She picked up the paper, folded it along its original creases, and walked out of the county records office into the gray light of a Tuesday afternoon, and for 3 blocks she didn't feel anything at all. She had married Damon Vance 2 years ago in a small courthouse ceremony he'd insisted on for simplicity. No big wedding. No families flown in. Just the two of them and a witness he'd hired off the street. She remembered the night they'd met, 3 years before that, at a fundraising gala her father had dragged her to. Damon had approached her by the dessert table with a glass of champagne in each hand. "You look like someone counting the minutes until she can leave," he'd said. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to someone doing the same math." He'd handed her a glass. Damon Vance. Elena Rourke. Rourke. He'd tilted his head, the way she'd later learn he did whenever he was recalculating something. "As in Rourke Holdings?" "As in my father, yes." Lucky him, Damon had said, smiling in a way she'd believed, for 3 years, was warmth. Having a daughter who hates these things as much as he probably does. She had thought it was charm. She understood now it had been research. What she didn't know, and wouldn't learn until much later, was that Damon had gone home from that gala and called Renata that same night. "I met her," he'd said. "Rourke's daughter. She's exactly what we talked about." "Careful, Damon," Renata had said. "Careful doesn't mean impossible. It means slow." "I can do slow," Damon had said. "I've got nothing but time, and she's got a trust that vests on her 30th birthday or her wedding day, whichever comes first. I intend to make sure it's the wedding. And me? You keep your name off anything public. You keep the sabbaticals, the conferences, the freedom. I keep building what we agreed to build. Nothing changes for you." "Everything changes for her," Renata had said. "That's not our problem," Damon had said. "It's an opportunity. She just doesn't know it yet." 3 years later, at a courthouse ceremony with a hired witness and a forged certificate no one had thought to check, the plan they'd built that night in a phone call became, on paper at least, a marriage. If you're watching this and you've ever found out something about the person you love that changed everything you thought you knew, drop a comment below and tell us where in the world you're watching from tonight. I read every single one, and I want to know who's sitting with me for this story. She didn't call Damon. She didn't text him. She drove straight to his office, the private wealth firm he ran on the 11th floor of the Ashford Tower, and she was 3 steps from his door when she heard his voice through the gap where it hadn't fully latched. "She still thinks it's real," Damon was saying. "She's never going to check. Why would she? She trusts me." Elena stopped walking. A woman's voice answered, low and amused. "You've kept this up for 2 years, Damon. Eventually something slips." "Nothing's going to slip, Renata. The certificate looks real enough to fool a courthouse clerk who isn't looking for problems. And even if it didn't, by the time anyone found out, I'd already have what I need." Elena's stomach turned over. Renata. Her aunt. Her mother's younger sister, the woman who used to babysit her, who had sat in the front row at a courthouse ceremony Elena thought was a small, private, honest thing. "And the boy?" Renata asked. "He's fine. He's with your sister in Denton." Nobody connects him to me and Elena won't be looking, because Elena doesn't even know I have a son. Elena put her hand against the wall. 5 years, Damon, Renata said. We've been married 5 years and you've had her thinking she's your wife for 2 of them. You understand how insane this is. I understand it's insane, Damon said. I also understand that her family's estate is worth more than anything I could build in a decade of honest work, and I understand that she's easier to manage than you ever were. You wanted a career. She wants a husband who compliments her cooking. You told her she was barren, Renata said. I heard you tell her that. I told her the doctor said her chances were low. It's not technically a lie. It just isn't the whole truth. It kept her from asking why we never tried very hard. That's cruel, even for you. It's efficient, Damon said. And it worked. She spent 2 years grateful I stayed with her despite it. Grateful, Renata. Do you understand how useful a grateful wife is? And when her father's trust fully vests? Renata asked. What happens to me? Nothing changes for you, Damon said. You get the life you already have. The academic conferences, the sabbaticals, the freedom to pretend you're not married at almost months of the year. I get the Rourke money. Everyone keeps what they actually wanted. Except her, Renata said, and for a moment there was something in her voice that might have been the beginning of guilt. She'll be fine, Damon said. She'll never even know how fine, because she'll never know any of this happened. Elena stepped back from the door before either of them could see her shadow in the gap. She walked to the elevator with her spine very straight and her face doing nothing at all, and by the time she reached her car in the parking garage, something in her chest had gone from broken to still. She called her aunt from the parking garage before she could talk herself out of it. Elena, Renata said, surprised, warm, exactly as she'd always sounded. This is a nice surprise. Is it true? Elena asked. 5 years married to Damon? The silence on the line lasted 4 full seconds. Elena. Just tell me if it's true. It's true, Renata said quietly. You sat in the front row at my wedding. I know. You babysat me when I was 7. You told me at Christmas last year that Damon was good for me. Elena, please, let me explain the context. There isn't context that fixes this, Elena said. There's just the fact that you knew, and you smiled at me anyway, for 2 years, at every holiday, every dinner, every single time I mentioned how happy I was. Her voice stayed level. I'm not calling for an apology, Renata. I'm calling so you know that I know. What you do with that is your business now. She ended the call before Renata could respond, and she didn't answer when her aunt tried calling back 4 times over the next hour. She didn't go home. She went to a hotel 2 miles from the tower and sat on the edge of the bed with her phone in her hand for 11 minutes before she called the number she'd saved 3 years ago and never used, her late father's estate attorney, Arthur Bennett, who had managed the Rourke family holdings since before Elena was born. Elena, he said, surprised. It's been a while. I need you to tell me something, and I need you to be exact, she said. If a marriage was never legally registered, if the certificate was forged, was I ever actually married? There was a pause on the line. Then, no. If there's no valid registration, there's no legal marriage. You'd have been living as husband and wife, but in the eyes of the law, you were never his spouse. So the trust, Elena said. My father's trust. The one that transfers to me fully upon marriage or my 30th birthday, whichever comes first, but reduces if I marry someone who isn't vetted by the estate committee. Elena, if you were never legally married, none of those marriage clauses ever triggered. The full trust remains yours, untouched, under your name alone, exactly as your father structured it before he died. Elena closed her eyes. Elena, Bennett said carefully, is something wrong? Everything is finally right, she said. I want you to do 3 things for me, Mr. Bennett, and I want them done by tomorrow morning. I'm listening. First, freeze every joint account Damon Vance has access to that touches any part of my name or my father's trust. Second, get a formal statement from the county records office confirming the certificate was forged, dated, notarized, on file. Third, she took a breath that didn't shake at all, find out everything you can about a woman named Renata Ward Calloway. I want to know exactly when she married Damon, what she's listed as on any joint filings, and whether there's a child's birth certificate anywhere in the state naming Damon Vance's father. Elena, this sounds like it's about more than a paperwork error. It is, she said. But I don't need you to understand it right now. I just need you to move fast. Consider it done, Bennett said. Your father would be relieved to hear you say all of that as calmly as you just did. My father would be furious it took me 2 years to say it at all, Elena said. She met Bennett in person 2 days later, in his office downtown, a room lined with the same law books that had sat behind him since she was a child visiting with her father. The house is in Damon's name only, Bennett said, sliding a folder across the desk. He bought it before the marriage, so there's no claim for you to make there, and frankly, I don't think you'd want one. I don't, Elena said. I don't want anything with his name on it. The joint accounts are frozen and will revert fully to your sole trust within the week. The investment portfolio your father built is untouched. Damon never had signing authority on it, whatever he told you about managing things together. Bennett looked at her over his glasses. He never actually had access to a cent of the real money, Elena. He was managing the appearance of a marriage, waiting for the trust to formally transfer into joint assumption on your 30th birthday. He miscalculated the timeline. He miscalculated a lot of things, Elena said. The one thing I'd recommend, Bennett said, is deciding, soon, what you want to do next. Not out of urgency. Out of the fact that you've spent 2 years making decisions around someone else's plans, and I suspect you've forgotten what it feels like to make one entirely your own. Elena thought about that on the drive back. She thought about her father's office, the ledgers and the port contracts and the particular seriousness with which he'd talked about the family's holdings, seriousness she'd never once been invited to share in because Damon had always been the one sitting at that table instead of her. She called Bennett back that evening. I want to be on the estate committee, she said. Not as a signature. As a voice. I want to understand every holding my father built, and I want a say in what happens to it. That's the first thing you've asked for. That isn't about damage control, Bennett said. I'll set up the introductions. Damon came home at 7 that evening, tie loosened, the particular loose-limbed contentment of a man who believed his life was fully under control. Hey, he said, dropping his keys in the bowl by the door. You're quiet. I went to the records office today, Elena said. She was sitting at the kitchen table, hands folded, the forged certificate placed neatly in front of her. Something crossed Damon's face, there and gone so fast that 2 years ago she would have missed it. She didn't miss it now. Why would you go there? He asked, careful, testing. I wanted a certified copy. For a mortgage application. She watched him. Funny thing. They told me the certificate's registration number doesn't exist. Damon's jaw tightened. Clerical error. Happens all the time. I'll call someone tomorrow. I also went to your office today, Elena said. The room went very quiet. I heard you talking to Renata, she said. About the certificate. About the boy in Denton. About how grateful I've been. She tilted her head. You said gratitude was useful. I want you to know I'm not grateful anymore. Damon's face did several things in quick succession: denial, calculation, something that might have been the beginning of fear. Elena, whatever you think you heard. I heard all of it, she said. 5 years married to my aunt. A son I was never told about. A lie about my body you used to keep me quiet and pliable for 2 years. She didn't miss it now. Why would you go there? He asked, careful, testing. I wanted a certified copy. For a mortgage application. She watched him. Funny thing. They told me the certificate's registration number doesn't exist. Damon's jaw tightened. Clerical error. Happens all the time. I'll call someone tomorrow. I also went to your office today, Elena said. The room went very quiet. "I heard you talking to Renata," she said. "About the certificate. About the boy in Denton. About how grateful I've been." She tilted her head. "You said gratitude was useful. I want you to know I'm not grateful anymore." Damon's face did several things in quick succession: denial, calculation, something that might have been the beginning of fear. "Elena, whatever you think you heard." "I heard all of it," she said. 5 years married to my aunt. A son I was never told about. A lie about my body you used to keep me quiet and pliable for 2 years. Her voice didn't rise. "You didn't marry me, Damon. You staged a performance and I was the only member of the audience who didn't know it was a play." "You have nowhere else to go," Damon said, his voice hardening, the mask slipping fully. "Your father's dead. Your mother's been gone for years. It's just you and me, Elena. You need this marriage more than you think." "I called Renata this afternoon," Elena said. "She confirmed everything. So did the county. So did the man who's been managing my father's estate since before you and I ever met at that gala where you did math on me instead of conversation." Damon's face went pale. "Elena." "I am unmarried," she said, standing, pulling her jacket from the back of the chair. "I have no children. The assets are mine, and mine alone." She looked at him the way she might look at a stranger who had asked her for directions. "You should have checked whether I needed you before you decided how useful I was." She walked out of the house they'd shared for 2 years, and she did not look back, not once, not even when he called her name 3 times from the doorway with a voice that was starting, for the first time in 5 years by Elena's count, to sound afraid. She called Mara from the car before she'd even pulled out of the driveway. Mara had been her roommate in college and her only real friend since, the one person who'd never quite warmed to Damon. "I need a place tonight," Elena said, when Mara picked up. "What happened?" "Everything," Elena said. "I'll explain when I get there. Just, can I come?" "You can always come," Mara said. "Drive safe." By the time Elena arrived, Mara had 2 glasses of wine poured in a blanket already pulled off the back of the couch. She listened to the whole thing, the forged certificate, the office door, Renata, the boy in Denton, without once interrupting. 5 years, Mara said finally. "He's been married 5 years. To my aunt." "To your aunt," Mara repeated, shaking her head slowly. "Elena, I need you to say the rest of it out loud, because I don't think you've said it yet. Not the facts. The actual thing." Elena looked at her wine glass. "He never loved me. He researched me. And I let 2 years pass being grateful for a man who thought gratitude was a management tool." Mara reached over and took her hand. "That part's over now. What's the next part?" "The next part is I stop being anyone's tool," Elena said. "Starting tonight." "Good," Mara said. "Now finish your wine. Tomorrow you fight. Tonight you just sit here." The freeze on the joint accounts took effect at 9 the next morning. The notarized statement from the county records office arrived at Bennett's desk by noon. The file on Renata, full legal name Renata Ward Vance, married to Damon in a different county 5 years earlier, listed as an academic advisor at Ashford University who had kept her maiden name professionally while remaining his actual, legal wife, landed on Elena's phone by that evening, along with a birth certificate for a 4-year-old boy named Caleb, father listed as Damon Vance. Damon called 19 times over the following week. Elena didn't answer any of them. He showed up at the hotel on the 4th day. The front desk called up to her room to ask if she wanted to be disturbed. "Tell him no," Elena said. "Tell him if he comes back, I'll have the hotel call the police, and then I'll have my lawyer add trespassing to the growing list of things he's done that he'll regret." The front desk relayed it. Elena watched from the window of her room, 4 floors up, as Damon stood in the lobby for a long moment before he left. He tried a different approach after that, a long, aggrieved voicemail about how she was overreacting, about how marriages are complicated, about how he'd always intended to tell her eventually. She listened to 11 seconds of it and deleted the rest. He assumed, because he had always assumed things about her, that eventually the silence would break, that a woman who had spent 2 years grateful for scraps would come crawling back once the shock wore off. He kept the house exactly as it was. He didn't change the locks. He told people at his office that he and his wife were working through something private, and he waited, the way a man waits for weather to pass, confident that it would. Renata came to see him 3 weeks after the call that ended without goodbye. She found him in the study, a glass of scotch he wasn't drinking sitting untouched on the desk. "She knows everything," Renata said. "About us. About Caleb." "I'm aware," Damon said. "She called me, Damon. Calm as anything. Told me she knew and hung up before I could say a word." "What did you want to say?" Renata sat down across from him, the way she used to when this had all seemed clever instead of corrosive. "I don't know anymore. I think I wanted to explain it in a way that made it sound less like what it actually was." "There isn't a version of this that sounds like something else," Damon said. "No," Renata agreed. "There isn't." She looked at him for a long moment. "I've been thinking about Caleb. About what happens when he's old enough to ask why he grew up in Denton with my sister instead of with either of his actual parents. That was always the arrangement." "It was always your arrangement," Renata said. "I went along with it because you made it sound temporary." "Efficient." 5 years isn't temporary, Damon. It's a childhood." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I think I made a mistake a long time before Elena ever found that certificate," Renata said. "I just didn't want to be the one to say it first." She left without finishing her scotch. Damon sat alone in the study a long time after, and for the first time in 5 years, the quiet didn't feel like something he'd built. It felt like something built around him, brick by brick, until there was no longer a door out that didn't require admitting what he'd done. Renata filed for divorce 6 weeks later. She drove to Denton the same week and sat her sister down at the kitchen table where Caleb did his homework every afternoon. "I want him living with me," Renata said. "Properly. Not as an arrangement. As my son." "What changed?" her sister asked. "I watched a woman I've known since she was 7 years old find out I'd helped hide a marriage and a child from her for 2 years, Renata said. And she didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just said she knew, and hung up, and I understood that the version of myself I'd have to explain to Caleb one day was someone I didn't want to be anymore." "And Damon?" "Damon can explain his own choices to his own son, when Caleb's old enough to ask," Renata said. "That's no longer my job to manage for him." She moved Caleb into her apartment 2 months later. Damon didn't fight the custody arrangement. He didn't have the standing left to fight much of anything. At the office, the questions started slowly and then didn't stop. A senior partner asked, carefully, whether the rumors about Damon's personal life had any bearing on the firm's standing with the Rourke estate. "There's no professional issue," Damon said. "There is if Ashford Tower's biggest client won't sit in a room with you," the partner said. "Arthur Bennett called this morning. He said any filing involving your signature would be delayed pending personal complications." "What personal complications, Damon?" Damon didn't answer. He didn't have one that wouldn't cost him more than his silence already was. By the time the quarter closed, 2 of his largest accounts had quietly moved elsewhere, represented, in both cases, by attorneys who cited nothing more specific than a change in confidence. Damon tried to salvage the largest of them personally, a shipping conglomerate that had worked with the firm for a decade, calling the CEO directly. "Robert, we've done good work together for 10 years, Damon said. "Whatever you've heard." "I heard your wife's aunt was also your wife," Robert said flatly. "I heard there's a child neither woman raised because you found it more convenient elsewhere." "I don't need to know if it's all true, Damon. I just need my company's name not sitting next to yours in the papers." A pause. "Nothing personal. It's just efficient." The word landed on Damon harder than anything else Robert could have said, because it was his own word, thrown back at him by a man who owed him nothing. Elena met Julian Hastings for the first time 6 weeks later, in a conference room on the top floor of Bennett's law firm, where the estate committee had assembled to certify the full transfer of the Rourke Trust into her sole name. "Ms. Rourke," Julian said, standing to shake her hand. Tall, gray at the temples, with the stillness of a man who'd spent decades in rooms where the wrong word cost money. "Arthur speaks highly of you." "He's known me since I was 6, Elena said. "He's obligated to." Julian smiled, unhurried. "I represent Hastings Infrastructure. We've been negotiating a joint port development with your father's estate that stalled after his passing. I understand the trust's finally settled. I'd like to reopen the conversation, if you're willing." "I read the file this morning," Elena said. "You want the Coastal Ridge parcel." "My father wanted final say on environmental terms before he signed anything. He never got that assurance from your team." Julian studied her. "Most people in your position would have let the lawyers handle the details. Most people in my position spent the last 2 years married to someone who counted on them not asking questions," Elena said. "I'm asking questions now. All of them." "Then let's talk about environmental terms," Julian said. They talked for 3 hours. It was the first conversation Elena had had in longer than she could count where no one was managing her. A month into the negotiations, a junior board member raised Damon's name in a strategy meeting, asking whether Ms. Rourke's personal situation might complicate the deal's optics. "Ms. Rourke's personal situation," Julian said, before Elena could respond, "is that she discovered a forged legal document and handled it with more precision than half the attorneys in this building. If anyone's optics are in question, it isn't hers. We're here to discuss the Coastal Ridge parcel. Does anyone have anything relevant to say about it?" No one did. Afterward, over dinner, Elena asked him about it. "You didn't have to do that." "I didn't do it for you," Julian said. "I did it because it was true. You don't strike me as a woman who needs rescuing, Elena. You strike me as a woman who's been surrounded by people too dishonest to just say the true thing out loud." "That's an accurate assessment." "I try to be accurate," Julian said. "It's cheaper than being kind and pretending otherwise." Over the following months, the business conversations became dinners, and the dinners became something neither of them rushed to name. When Elena told him plainly about the forged certificate, the 5 years, and the boy in Denton, he didn't flinch and he didn't pity her. "He miscalculated you," Julian said. "That's the whole story. Everything else is detail." Damon, meanwhile, continued to wait. He told his sister Elena would come around. He was still waiting 4 months after the hotel lobby when his sister called him, breathless, telling him to turn on the television. The broadcast was a business channel segment on the Hastings-Rourke Alliance, a merger of interests between Julian Hastings and Elena Rourke, whose father's trust, fully vested, had made her one of the largest private shareholders in the region. The segment covered the formal announcement of their marriage, a quiet courthouse affair filed, registered, and verified in triplicate before either of them said a word to the press. Elena stood beside Julian in a charcoal suit, composed, answering a reporter's question with the same flat precision she'd used on Damon the night she left. "People keep asking me how I feel, having gone from managing a household to co-managing one of the largest infrastructure portfolios in the country. The honest answer is I feel exactly the same. I was always capable of this. It just took someone lying to me badly enough that I stopped waiting for permission." The reporter laughed, unsure if it was a joke. Elena didn't clarify. Damon watched the segment twice, in silence, his sister still on the phone asking if he was seeing what she was seeing. "Damon," she said. "Isn't that your wife?" "No," Damon said quietly. "She stopped being that a long time before I noticed." He found out where the Alliance announcement dinner was being held 2 nights later, a private gathering at the Ashford Grand, and told himself, driving there, that 4 months was long enough for anyone's anger to wear down. He didn't get past the second security checkpoint before Julian saw him. "Mr. Vance," Julian said, stepping between Damon and the ballroom entrance. "You weren't on the guest list. I need 5 minutes with Elena." "You had 2 years with Elena," Julian said. "You spent them lying to her about a marriage, a child, and her own body. I don't think you're owed 5 more minutes, but we can ask her, if you'd like, and you can hear it from her directly. Elena appeared in the doorway, drawn by his voice. Elena, Damon said. Please. Just 5 minutes. Elena looked at him for a long moment, not with hatred, but with the stillness of someone assessing a stranger. I don't have anything left to say to you, Damon, she said. I said all of it the night I left. You were just too busy waiting for me to change my mind to actually hear it. She looked at Julian. Can we go back inside? I told the reporters 5 minutes. They walked back into the ballroom together. Security escorted Damon out 4 minutes later without another word from him. Renata called him that night. He didn't answer. He sat in the house Elena had left, in a quiet that no longer felt like control, and understood, for months too late, that the woman he'd spent 2 years managing had simply been waiting for a reason good enough to stop. Elena and Julian moved into a house on the coast that spring, close enough to the coastal ridge site that she could watch the construction from the kitchen window. Renata called one afternoon, hesitant, asking if Elena would meet Caleb sometime, not as anything owed. Just an option, if you ever wanted it. Elena thought about it for 3 days before she answered. I'd like that. He didn't do anything wrong. None of this was his choice. They met at a park near Renata's apartment, Caleb clutching a soccer ball, 5 years old and unaware of anything except that a new adult wanted to kick it around with him. Are you my dad's other wife? Caleb asked, with the blunt clarity only a child could manage. I was, Elena said. Not anymore. But I'd like to be your friend, if that's all right. Can you actually kick a ball, or are you going to be bad at it like my Aunt Renata? I guess we'll find out, Elena said, and laughed without calculating what it cost her. Damon sold the house 8 months later, quietly, through an agent who never mentioned his name in the listing. He moved into a smaller apartment across town, working at a mid-sized firm 2 tiers below the one he'd built his name at. Mara visited the coast house often, always with a bottle of wine and the same blunt honesty she'd offered on her couch that first night. You know what I remember most? Mara said one evening, watching the construction lights flicker on the ridge below. You said the next part was that you'd stop being anyone's tool. Here we are. It didn't feel fast, Elena said. It felt like the longest year of my life. Long and fast aren't opposites, Mara said. To gray Tuesday afternoons. To gray Tuesday afternoons, Elena repeated, and meant it. Below them, the ridge lights blinked on one by one as the construction crews wrapped their shift, and somewhere across town a man who had once measured her worth in the value of a trust fund sat alone in a smaller apartment, still waiting for a phone call that was never going to come. If this story hit you somewhere, tell us in the comments which moment made you sit up straightest. We read every single one. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button now, because these stories remind us it's never too late to stop being grateful for the wrong things. See you in the next one.